In an attempt to strengthen our relationship, I bought my mom a new house, but she secretly moved in with my abusive stepfather and his entitled daughters instead. I suppose that every story about family drama begins with everything being fine until, well, my story isn't any different. Everything was fine until I turned 11. My name is Tasha, and I grew up in a cozy two-story house with my parents. It wasn't fancy, but it was home, and mom and dad seemed happy enough to my child's eyes. The divorce came as a surprise, even though it was peaceful, with no arguments over furniture or screaming, unlike what my friend Jenny went through when her parents divorced. Dad simply moved out one day, taking his tools and clothes with him, and he gave me a tight hug. "Sadie will always be there for you, Princess Mom." I spent weekends with Dad at his tiny apartment above the auto repair shop he was trying to get off the ground. It always smelled like coffee and motor oil, but I loved it. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom met Richard. He had 2 daughters, Sarah and Emma, both of whom were a few years younger than me. When Mom told me about their engagement, her eyes lit up like Christmas lights, and she gushed, "Just think of it, honey," holding my hands in hers. "You'll have sisters, and we'll be a proper family again. Richard is such a wonderful man, and his girls are so sweet. You'll love having siblings." The wedding was small but lovely, and I wore a pale blue dress and carried a basket of flowers. Sarah and Emma wore matching pink dresses and kept whispering and giggling together during the ceremony. I tried to catch their eyes, hoping they'd include me in their secret jokes, but they just turned away when they moved in. I was so excited that I could hardly sleep the night before. I had cleaned my room, made room in the bathroom cabinet for their belongings, and even made welcome cards for each of them. Their rooms? "See, you're already being such a good sister," she said, kissing my forehead. If only I had known what was going to happen, I might have fought harder to keep things the way they were, or I might have told Dad how I truly felt about Mom remarrying, but I was 11 years old, and my fairy tale turned into a nightmare in precisely 3 days. On the 4th morning after they moved in, I got up early as usual to get ready for school, but when I tried to enter the bathroom, the door was locked. Sarah called out in a sing-song voice, and after a minute or 2 passed, I kept knocking, telling them I needed to get ready for school, but all I could hear was laughter and the sound of the hairdryer. At dinner that night, I went to sit in my usual spot next to Mom, but Sarah had already taken it. When I opened my mouth to protest, Mom cut me off. "Tasha, honey, why don't you sit over there?" She pointed to the chair furthest from her next to the edge of the table. "It's just a chair. Don't make a fuss." Sarah and Emma were beautifully groomed, wearing matching outfits. "Beauty takes time," Emma smirked as they passed me. "You should know that." "Oh wait, maybe you don't." I barely had time to brush my teeth before the school bus arrived. Richard smiled at the scene, fussing over them the way she used to fuss over me, and I picked at my food in silence. Things got worse when Sarah saw my collection of hair accessories, which my mother and I had purchased together on our weekly shopping trips. "Oh my God, look at these," Sarah exclaimed, pulling out my favorite butterfly clips, which would look so much better on us. "Those are mine," I said, trying to take them back. Mom firmly said, "Don't be greedy, Tasha." Sarah and Emma then began calling me greedy Tasha whenever adults weren't looking, but that wasn't enough for them. My textbooks would mysteriously end up with torn pages, and my clothes would get unintentionally stained with nail polish. I finally snapped one day after discovering my favorite sweater with a huge hole in it, which earned me a lecture from both Mom and Richard about family and gratitude. The final blow came a week later when Mom announced she was reorganizing the bedrooms. Sarah and Emma needed more space for their belongings, she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your room has better closets, so they'll take that one. We've already moved your stuff to the small room next to the laundry." "Tasha, stop trying to get attention. I know this adjustment is difficult, but every time I tried to tell Mom, she would shake her head disapprovingly." It was essentially a glorified closet with a window. It barely fit my bed and dresser. When I realized how much stuff I had packed into that small space, something inside of me broke. This wasn't just about a room. It was about my place in this family, or rather my lack of one. Richard wasn't content to let his daughters torment me. He had to join in as well. Any small thing I did wrong proved that I was a difficult child. If I was quiet, I was sulking. If I spoke up, I was being disruptive. I couldn't win. Just like your father, he would shake his head whenever I didn't live up to his impossible standards, always causing trouble. The ironic thing is that Dad was actually doing fairly well with his auto repair business, which he specialized in luxury cars, and although it was difficult at first, he was gradually establishing a strong reputation. I never told Richard this, though, and instead let him think about what he wanted. My weekends with Dad became my lifeline. We would order pizza, watch old movies, and he would tell me stories about the fancy cars he was working on. Sometimes, I would sit in his office while he completed paperwork, just enjoying the calm atmosphere. He would occasionally ask how things were at home, princess, and I would always respond, fine. He had enough on his plate working long hours to get his business off the ground. The last thing he needed was to worry about me too. The years passed quickly, so I threw myself into my studies, spending as much time as possible at the library or with friends, anything to avoid being home before knowing that high school graduation was quickly approaching. I applied to a number of colleges and received acceptance letters from the majority of them. I was ecstatic to finally have the opportunity to move away and start over, and the day after graduation, I couldn't contain my excitement any longer. As we were all at dinner, I decided to share my news with Richard, and he sneered, "Who exactly is going to pay for that? Your loss's father, the guy who can barely keep his little garage afloat." As I pulled out the acceptance letters, Richard's laugh cut through my words like a knife. It wasn't a genuine laugh, though, and he sneered. I was suddenly feeling heaviness in my hands. "I have scholarships, and I can get loans." "Don't be ridiculous," he interrupted. "We're not co-signing any loans for you. We're saving our money for Sarah and Emma's education." I turned to Mom in the hopes that she would defend me and be my mother for once. She simply looked down at her plate. "Richard's right, honey," she said softly. "We need to think about the girl's future." Something inside of me snapped all the hurt, rejection, and years of being ignored. All you care about is pleasing your precious husband and his perfect daughters. When was the last time you even asked how I was doing? When was the last time you behaved like my mother rather than their stepmother? The silence that followed was deafening, and then there was a sharp crack of skin against skin. It took me a moment to realize that my mother, my own mother, had slapped me across the face. My cheek hurt, but what hurt even more was seeing Sarah and Emma's expressions. They were clearly enjoying the show, and Richard sat there with a satisfied smirk, as if he had been waiting for this moment. I touched my cheek and felt the heat radiating from where her hand had struck Mom. She just stood there, her hand still raised, her face a mixture of shock and anger. Perhaps I didn't stay to find out because I fled to my small room and began packing my belongings. I could hear movement in the house, but no one came to check on me. No one tried to stop me, and no one apologized. I made it about a block before the adrenaline wore off and reality set in, and I realized that I was 18, without money, no plan, and nowhere to go. My hands were shaking as I took out my phone and called Dad. "Hey, princess, what's up?" His upbeat voice nearly made me cry, but I managed to keep my voice steady and said, "Can you come get me?" 15 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up next to me. For a moment, I thought I had given him the wrong street, but he was smiling through the open window like he said, "This is yours," as he got out to assist me with my suitcase. I stared at him in shock, thinking it was a customer's car, but he laughed that warm, familiar laugh I'd grown up with. Then he saw my suitcase, and his expression changed. "Tasha, what's going on? Why are you out here with a suitcase?" Richard's mockery, Mom's betrayal, Richard's college acceptances, and the slap Dad's face darkened with each word. By the end, he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. He growled, beginning to turn the car around, but I grabbed his arm, saying, "No, Dad, please don't. It's not worth it. I just want to leave." I was genuinely happy for him, but I must have looked a little depressed thinking about my own situation because he quickly added, "You know what else? I've been saving money for years, putting aside whatever I could for your college fund. It's not enough for an Ivy League school, but combined with your scholarships, I nearly got it." Then nodded, "You're right. Let's go home over lunch." At his place. Remember that fleet contract I was sitting on with the luxury car rental company? He was trying to act casual, but I could see him practically bouncing with excitement. Choked on my pasta. "You've been saving for my college," he said, reaching across the table and squeezing my hand. "Of course I have, princess," he said. "Did you really think I'd let Richard be right about me for the first time that day?" I started crying, but these were happy tears for all the years I'd spent shielding my dad from my problems, and here he'd been quietly planning for my future. The entire time. I decided to keep my college secret from Mom and her ideal family so they would think they'd won. I spent that summer living with Dad and working at the Sweet Bean Cafe downtown to save some extra cash, and one afternoon the bell above the door chimed, and Sarah and Emma entered, dressed as though they were going to a fashion show rather than a coffee shop. They took a booth in my section. Naturally, they did, and grinned as I walked up with my notepad. Sarah drew loudly enough for the other customers to hear, so it seems like someone had discovered their true calling. Emma snickered. "Yeah, we just wanted to see how the other half lives before we head off to college in the fall. Dad's already picked out the perfect schools for us." "Can I take your order?" I said in a professional manner, fighting back a smile. If they only knew. "Oh, you'll probably still be taking orders when we graduate." Sarah kept checking her manicured nails, "But don't worry, perhaps we'll leave you some nice tips when we get home from college." I simply grinned and wrote down their intricate half-hot drink orders, letting them enjoy themselves. The neighboring state, I threw myself into my business classes, made new friends, and began creating a life that had nothing to do with my former mom. My dad never called to apologize for the slap or for anything else, and we spoke almost every day. 4 years passed, and I graduated with honors and found a job at a marketing firm in the same city as my college. The starting salary wasn't great, but it was enough to live comfortably in a small apartment. I worked hard, stayed late, and took on extra projects until my boss noticed, and then the promotions began coming. First junior manager, then senior manager, and then team leader. Each promotion came with a nice pay increase, and I was able to start saving significant money for the first time in my life. "I want you to have this," he said, pulling out a cashier's check. The amount made me dizzy, but it's for a down payment on your own place. "You've worked so hard, princess. You deserve this." 2 months later, I was moving into my own apartment, not rented, and more raises came with more promotions. I started thinking about buying a house, maybe in one of those quiet neighborhoods outside the city, maybe with a garden. One evening, my phone rang at an unknown number. "Tasha." The voice was hesitantly familiar in a way that made my stomach knot. "It's Mom. I think it's time we talk." I heard myself say, "Let's talk," and we decided to meet at a small cafe in downtown neutral territory. When Mom arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older and exhausted, not like the confident woman who had chosen her new family over me years ago. "You look wonderful," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her hands were shaking a little as she arranged her napkin. We had awkward small talk about the weather and my job until the waitress brought our coffee, and then Mom took a deep breath and revealed the truth. "I left Richard." She laughed bitterly after they graduated, but when it came time, they had excuses, always excuses. The job market was difficult, they needed to concentrate on their careers, and they had their own expenses. Richard simply packed up and moved in with Sarah, saying he couldn't handle the financial stress any longer. I started, but she held up her hand and said, "I was wrong, Tasha. I chose them over you. I let them hurt you. I hurt you, and I am so sorry." The tears in her eyes were genuine. The tremor in her voice was genuine, and despite everything, despite all the years of suffering and rejection, I found myself reaching across the table to take her hand and whisper, "I forgive you." I was surprised by how much I meant it. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation about our mom being homeless and alone after giving everything to people who had given nothing back. It felt like karma in a way, but instead of making me happy, I felt a strange mix of sadness and opportunity, a chance to be the bigger person. I called her on a Wednesday evening and said, "I've been thinking about buying a house." After we said hello, I mentioned that something in the old neighborhood with a garden might be too big for just me, but perhaps you'd like to live there. I took a week off work and flew home to look for a house, and I found a lovely place just outside town. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and welcoming, with a wraparound porch and mature trees in the yard. When Dad learned about my choice, Yard Mom cried when she saw it. I thought he would be upset, but instead he surprised me. "You have a bigger heart than most princesses," he said, hugging me tightly. "I was proud of you." Over the next few months, we settled into a nice routine where I would fly in for weekend visits, spend time with Dad first, and then head over to the new house to see Mom. We were gradually reestablishing our relationship, and she seemed happier, more like the mom I remembered from my childhood. On one visit, I noticed some strange items in the house, like men's boots by the door and a jacket I didn't recognize hanging in the hallway. "Oh, just a friend visiting Mom," she said quickly. When the phone rang on a Tuesday morning, I was just getting settled at work when Carol's number appeared on my phone. "Tasha, honey," she said hesitantly, "there's something you need to know. It's about your mother. She's well. Richard's living in the house. He and his daughters moved in months ago." "That's impossible," I said. "I was just there 2 weeks ago." "It was just Mom, because she makes them leave before you visit," and Carol said gently. "They clear out every time you're scheduled to come. I found out from Marie next door. She's been watching them come and go for months now." Suddenly, the boots and jacket that I had seen made terrible sense. I thanked her, hung up, and made the first flight home. It was Wednesday afternoon when I arrived at the house in my rental car. Richard's old pickup was in the driveway, the same one he'd had all those years ago. My key turned smoothly in the lock, and the scene in the kitchen could have been taken from my adolescence. Mom was at the stove, wearing her favorite apron, fussing over a pot of something that smelled like Richard's favorite beef stew. Sarah Emma was at the kitchen table, looking exactly like their old entitled selves, but Richard was reading the newspaper. Mom saw me first. The wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor, and Tasha's face turned white. "I wasn't expecting you until Saturday." Clearly, I said in a surprisingly steady voice, "What are they doing here?" "We live here." And Sarah smirked as she invited us. She realized that families should stick together, so I turned to my mom, who was trembling and wiping her hands on her apron after everything they had done to you. They apologized, saying weakly, "They're trying to make things right." Richard had changed, the girls had changed, so I cut her off, and I saw that familiar stubborn look cross her face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I wanted them here. I love them. Mom waved her hand dismissively, destroying my belongings, stealing my room, and making my life miserable years ago. They were still kids, but what about now? I demanded that they use you for college money and abandon you, and Richard did just that. Sarah and Emma exchanged smug looks, and Richard just sat there with that same self-satisfied smile I remembered from my childhood. "Okay," I said in a cold voice, "I'm giving you a choice, Mom. Right now. Them or me." The silence that followed seemed to go on forever. I watched Mom's face, looking for any sign of the mother I used to know, the one who braided my hair, kissed my scraped knees, and told me that I could be anything I wanted to be. Finally, she said, "We're happy together." Her voice was weak. "You have 2 days to leave my house, all of you. You can't do this." Mom's voice rose, shrieked. "I'm your mother. You can't throw me out. Watch me." 2 days later, I returned, and nothing had changed. Their cars were still in the driveway, and when I walked in, they were all sitting in the living room as if they owned the place. "I told you to leave." Mom actually laughed. "And I told you you can't throw me out." "You can't hear your mother fine," I said. I took out my phone and dialed 911. "You wouldn't dare." Richard began to get up from his chair and say, "Hello. Yes, I need help getting unauthorized people off my property." I made sure to look at Mom the entire time, and when the police arrived a minute later, she screamed and sobbed as they told her that, yes, I could evict them, and no, she didn't have the legal right to stay. Richard became extremely angry and called me every derogatory name he could think of. Sarah and Emma joined in their designer clothes and fake smiles. As the police escorted them out after everything I've done for you and everything you've done for me, I watched them load their belongings into their cars and say, "One thing, Mom, just one thing. You've been there for me since the day you married him," but she never had an answer. Aunt Carol keeps me informed, but I never ask. They live in a small apartment across town, struggling to make ends meet, and Richard is still unemployed. Sarah and Emma never visit because they are too busy with their own lives to care for the mother who gave up everything for them. Mom calls late at night, but I never answer, and the house is empty most of the time. I'm considering selling it, maybe buying something smaller, cozier, and free of memories.